Yo, what's up? I'm Elder Terror, and welcome back to my channel where I like to talk about all things spooky, scary, and have a little bit of fun. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Robert Eggers' 2024 masterclass reimagining of 1922's Nosferatu, which itself was a reimagining of Bram Stoker's Dracula that was written back in 1897. Now, we all know who Dracula is. I mean, Dracula's the original vampire that sets the tone for all of the rules and boundaries that we know about vampires to this day. It takes the basic vampire folklore that existed back in the early centuries and expands upon it to create the horror villain that we've turned into an icon as years have progressed. But while Dracula represents a suave, warlord, criminal kind of guy that died on the battlefield and made a deal with the devil to be resurrected as a vampire, Nosferatu takes a spin on that and creates something very different. Nosferatu is a decrepit, disgusting, ancient creature of sorts. He wasn't a warlord, but was more so described as a warlock, who made a deal with the demon Belial to allow him to cast spells for Satan. And in exchange, he was given this inexplicable power that created him to be the vampire. Now, there's many similarities between Dracula and Nosferatu, but there's also a lot of derivatives. However, between this 1922 version and the 2024 version that Robert Eggers has just given us, all of those major beats remain intact and expanded upon in great detail. Nosferatu is a lot more than what you generally think of when you think of vampires, especially under modern day contexts. Robert Eggers and his team really went back and dug into that folklore to create this horrible, menacing visage that we see. From the very first frames of the movie to the very last, it's very apparent that Nosferatu is not your average vampire. Back in the 1920s, when the original Nosferatu came out, there was a lot of limitations on what they could do and depict in the film. But this 2024 version pulls no punches. It is straight to the wall, man. This whole thing just feels like a disjointed nightmare of sorts. The pacing at the beginning of the film is so laser fast. It's just bam, bam, bam. And then the second and third acts kind of slow down a little bit. When I left this film, one of the first thoughts that I had was, man, that was amazing. But the second one that followed it up was, general audiences are going to hate this. And I think a big part of that is the way that they decided to make those artistic decisions to make this feel like such a surreal dream. I mean, the movie kind of opens with a dream, with our main character, Ellen, calling out to whatever spirit will hear her, and unknowingly wakes up Count Orlok. This opening sequence and really just the rest of the movie are filmed so intensely. It's very jarring and creepy, and though there's not too much like blood and guts in the movie, the atmosphere alone is enough to make your skin crawl. I mean, Robert Eggers and his cinematographer went to extreme lengths to try to make sure that everything looked perfect for this film. There's a lot of conventional ways that people film at night, and none of them really fit the vibe that they were going for here. So the chore of lighting this thing and color correcting it alone took them a lot of time. It just shows a love for the craft that a lot of filmmakers don't have these days and don't take the time to do. But I guess that's what separates Robert Eggers from the rest. I mean, the last few movies that this guy has put out have all just been insane. And speaking of his last few movies, I was very happy to see Willem Dafoe make a return, being as bombastic as he always is. And horror newcomer Lily Rose Depp puts on an amazing performance, especially with her physical acting when they're showing her being taken over or possessed by Count Orlok. And yes, when I say possessed, I really do mean that. I heard before I went into this film that it felt a little bit less like your classic vampire movie and a little bit more like a possession of sorts. And that really hits the nail on the head for the vibe that this film takes throughout it. Nosferatu and Dracula, for that matter, are love stories at their core. And Nosferatu chooses to focus on the relationship of this eldritch, dark vampire wizard guy who is accidentally awoken by a mystic through the ether, represented by our character Ellen. But that's about as much as I can say without getting into spoiler territory, so let's hop into it. Nosferatu is a 2024 American Gothic horror film written and directed by Robert Eggers. It is a remake of the 1922 silent expressionist film Nosferatu, which was before it inspired by Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. The film stars Bill Skarsgård as the titular character, where he displays some amazing vocal and physical acting prowess. And it has to be noted that he dropped his voice a whole octave in order to do the Count Orlok voice. I originally thought that this had to be digitally edited, but it seems that he took some Mongolian throat singing lessons in order to get that tone. Nicholas Hoult and Lily Rose Depp are also featured as the married Hutter couple. And we'll be seeing Willem Dafoe take up the Albin Eberhard von Franz role for this film. Development on Nosferatu initially began in 2015 when Eggers planned to make his second film, describing it as his lifelong passion project, but he eventually opted to delay its production. The film begins as a young Ellen, played by Lily Rose Depp, calls out to the void seeking companionship. She exclaims her loneliness and regard for herself as being different than others, feeling ostracized by such. And though her call is answered, it is not by a guardian angel, but she is instead attacked by a beastly vision, causing her to have a seizure. Flashing forward years later to the winter of 1838, a now adult Ellen lives in the town of Wisborg, Germany with her husband, Thomas Hudler, a real estate agent. Hoping to gain financial security for him and his wife, Thomas accepts a commission from his employer, Herr Nock, to sell a decrepit stately home in Weisberg to the reclusive and eccentric Count Orlok. Unknown to Thomas, however, Nock had arranged this as part of an occult pact with Orlok. We even see him carving into his flesh and doing some kind of insane ritual that seems to invoke or summon Orlok in some capacity. When Thomas returns home to tell Ellen of this, she becomes fearful and asks that Thomas remains with her, confessing that before their wedding, she had a dream in which she married Death himself, witnessing the perish of all of her relatives in attendance, and that it scared her so much because of how much she enjoyed it. Thomas, in some excellent line delivery, dismisses her fears, tells her never to speak of these things ever again, and then departs for Count Orlok's castle in Transylvania, leaving Ellen in the care of a wealthy friend of his, Friedrich Harding. Yeah, right from Jump Street here, we're learning that Ellen is, a little bonkers. It's very clear from the get-go that something is not quite right with this woman. She expresses to Thomas that these kind of feelings riddled her childhood, but that his presence in her life had temporarily put a hold on all that. It's because of this that she fears for him to go out on his journey. I feel like it's an important thing to note that the, thoughts around women's mental health back in these days were a little dated, to say the least. And with Ellen rambling like this, everyone around her is just gonna quickly assume that she's absolutely insane. Arriving to Transylvania, Thomas is shunned by the local Romani peasantry for affiliating with Orlok, and that night he witnesses a strange ritual in which the locals exhumed a corpse of that which they claimed to be a vampire's, and impaling its chest with an iron stake. The corpse jolts in pain and vomits blood, proving that it is no mere corpse, and Thomas, stricken with fear, passes out and wakes in bed the next morning, not quite sure if what he experienced was a dream or reality. Arriving at the Castle Orlok very early in the next morning, Thomas is greeted by an impatient and menacing Count Orlok, who dines with him and insists on finalizing his purchase immediately. At this point in the film, I just have to mention that this is Robert Eggers' cinematography at its peak, man. When Thomas makes his voyage to the castle, the visuals that we are greeted with to show us this journey are absolutely insane. It can only be described as feeling straight out of a dream. I don't know how they pulled this all off practically. And the vibes when Thomas enters the castle to meet Orlok are just spot on. The whole room being completely pitch black, only lit by the flames in the fireplace and on the candles. It is just untouchable. We don't get stuff like this in a lot of movies. Thomas tries to inquiry about the villagers and what he saw, but Orlok quickly disregards this. He says that the locals are crazy and that that's why he must leave these lands. During their conversation, Thomas cuts his thumb with a bread knife. This puts an abrupt end to their meeting when Orlok temporarily loses his cool and dismisses Thomas for the night. When over the night, he sneaks into Thomas's room and drinks from his blood, revealing to him that he is a vampire. The next night, Orlok and Thomas try to get back to their agreement so that Thomas can get the heck out of there and go home. But while frozen in fear, Orlok pulls one over on Thomas without him realizing. Orlok swipes Thomas's locket, which contains a lock of Ellen's hair, and has him sign a mysterious document written in an occult script that Thomas couldn't even read. And in this moment, Orlok tricks Thomas into signing Ellen over to him. He even sniffs the locket, muttering that it smells of lilac, an interesting detail from Ellen's dream earlier. Thomas gets totally freaked out by all of this and demands to go home, as he feels plagued by nightmares. But Orlok denies this request and demands that he stays at the castle. The next day, Thomas goes snooping around a little and finds Orlok sleeping in his coffin. Here he tries to kill him with a pickaxe, but Orlok springs awake and counterattacks. In classic Dracula fashion, Orlok sends a pack of wolves after Thomas, and in a flee from the wolves, Thomas falls into a river, effectively escaping the castle. He is later found and nursed to health by nuns, who entreat him to stay and recuperate, claiming that the Count cannot enter their sacred walls. But Thomas must return to his Ellen, so he rushes back to Weisberg to protect her. The nuns perform a ceremony on Thomas to heal his soul, as they claim that he has been lost in shadow. They reveal to Thomas that Orlok was a black sorcerer in life, and that Satan has preserved his soul in his living corpse in blasphemy. As Thomas is raced back home like an unconscious Aragorn on the back of his horse, Orlok takes the quicker route and sails for Weisberg. This scene here inspired by the same chapter in the Dracula book that invoked the last voyage of the Demeter last year. The poor ship and crew set sail, unaware that they are carrying Orlok's coffin, a grave of dirt and plague-infested rats that slowly free themselves and kill everyone along the ship. Meanwhile, Ellen is attacked by bouts of sleepwalking and seizures, which her doctor struggles to treat. As the episodes worsen, the doctor turns to his mentor, Albin Eberhard von Franz. Willem Dafoe's amazing character, a brilliant scientist ostracized in Switzerland for his occult beliefs. Von Franz deduces that Ellen is under the spell of Nosferatu, a demonic, plague-bearing vampire. Friedrich is skeptical, believing her symptoms spring from an anxiety disorder over Thomas's absence. Knock, Thomas's employer whom we previously spoke about, is institutionalized after a gleeful rampage, and he seems to echo Ellen's prophecies over Orlok's impending arrival. Ellen's doctor and von Franz realize that the two are under the same spirit and decide to search Knock's office. Here, they learn that Orlok is in fact the Nosferatu. Thomas returns to Weisborg as Orlok's arrival begins the plague. Knock escapes from custody, killing an officer, and escorts Orlok to his new home. Here, Orlok begins the final act in his plot when he appears to Ellen in a dream, taunting her that he tricked Thomas into signing the divorce papers. He tells her that Thomas signed her away for none more than a sack of gold, and Orlok warns that she must approve of the divorce and accept him into her heart within 2 more nights and reaffirm the pact that she made when she summoned him as a girl, or that he will kill Thomas and let the plague consume the rest of Weisborg. Ellen rebukes this, and the following night, Orlok kills Friedrich's family to demonstrate his power. We haven't spoken too much about Friedrich and his family at this point, but for the most part, they did everything that they could to try to help Ellen out. It appears that Ellen had a long-standing friendship with Friedrich's wife, and it absolutely destroyed their household having to watch Ellen go through these possession fits. But Friedrich, being a wealthy man of reason, could not let all these mutterings of evil and devils really get to him. He couldn't believe it for a second. And his refusal to listen to Ellen in the long term caused a whole family to die. Only then, and at this point, does he completely lose his mind and grip on everything. Friedrich is no longer a player in this game. When Dracula arrives to England, he brings death everywhere that he goes. The beat of him bringing the plague with him was in the original, and it's just one of those things where, like, Orlok doesn't have to do too much in order to be this big menacing creature. I mean, just his mere presence in the town is causing everyone there to die and get sick in the streets. He's a curse on man itself. Knowing that things have gone too far, it will only get worse. Thomas and von Franz expedite a plan to take out and destroy Orlok. But when they go out searching for Friedrich to have his help, they find him dead in his family's mausoleum after succumbing to the plague. Von Franz and Thomas plan to destroy Orlok's resting place, hoping that that alone will be enough to defeat him. But from his occult research, von Franz theorizes that Nosferatu can only truly be destroyed by a fair maiden's willing sacrifice. He shares this with Ellen and she agrees to the plan, hoping to protect the life of her Thomas. That night, she sets a trap and psychically summons Orlok to her chamber. When Thomas and von Franz arrive to Orlok's coffin to torch him, they instead find Knock in his place and kill him with a stake to the heart. Von Franz then proceeds to set fire to the whole crypt, but Thomas realizes that the expedition was just a diversion and rushes back to attempt to save Ellen. Back at their home, Ellen tricks the Count into feasting on her blood, psychically tapping into the same connection that he had used to lure her in earlier. Finally having his maiden in his grasp, Orlok feasts on her blood until the sun rises, and when he notices, he attempts to stop, but the simple suggestion from Ellen forces him to continue. As the golden rays touch his flesh, Orlok withers into a corpse, and von Franz, Thomas, and the doctor arrive just in time to find Ellen deceased, having sacrificed herself to end Orlok and his plague. And that is 2024's Nosferatu. What'd you think about it? What if I just ended it there? So there's a lot going on in 2024's Nosferatu. I mean, Robert Eggers really went hammer time with this one. From the visuals to the acting to the display of possession, the visceral pain that you could feel from Lily Rose Depp's character as she was going through this is just insane, man. For a movie where not a whole lot of people die on screen, this thing is terrifying. At the beginning of the film, Lily Rose Depp's character calls out to the cosmos or whatever, trying to find some kind of connection, and accidentally awakens this horrible evil demon that attaches himself to her. And throughout the movie, we see how she is attached and how that affects her. But the flip side of the coin is that that's also kind of happening to this ancient vampire demon guy, the Count Orlok. And in the end, Ellen is able to harness that power to use it against him, putting an end to him for good. Count Orlok is a centuries and centuries old vampire. It's said that he was probably asleep in his coffin for a couple couple of hundred years before Ellen woke him up at the beginning of the film. From the time that she was a child until the time that he decides to set this whole plan into play, he spends that trying to regain any kind of power that he can, and it takes him that full amount of time to even begin to try to do that. When he first comes to Ellen, he's none more than a vision or kind of a nightmare of sorts, but as he feeds on her psychic connection like the vampire that he is, he's eventually able to get enough power to start influencing her life in little ways, seemingly putting the dominoes exactly where they needed to be to get her husband where he needed to be at the right time and make sure that he was going to find his way to her. He's very one-track minded, this Count Orlok. But what did you think of the film? Have you seen Nosferatu yet? Have you seen the original? Have you seen any of the other adaptations or remakes? How do you feel about Nosferatu versus Dracula? I mean, you can compare the two so much, but though they're essentially the same story, the same legend, similarly enough that Bram Stoker's wife wanted them to destroy every reel that had the original Nosferatu on it because she thought that it was too close. But there's so many fundamental differences between the two. I mean, Dracula could walk around in sunlight, for instance. He was weakened by it, but it didn't kill him the way that it did for Nosferatu. Regardless, the modern day vampire lore would be nothing without these two forms of media. So drop a comment down below, let me know what you think about these things, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos just like this one. As always, I've been Elder Sarah, and whether your day's been going good or bad today, I hope it gets better.